in the air.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to Place of Assembly. This is a very unusual intro I'm recording. I'm in a rental car, having driven from Philadelphia back to New York today after having a flight rerouted from Dallas to Philly. And I didn't get my time today to do what I thought I was going to get to do, which was record the intro to this show. So I'm doing it in the car on the way home, trying to get this ready for y'all. But tonight we have an exciting episode. This is the first of a three-part series where we're looking at cultural organization and the arts in China and Hong Kong. Today on the show, we've got members from Shanghai Community Radio, and we are joined by our special guest host for these three episodes, Alan Huang of Awesome Agency Asia. I normally like to record my intros to shows where I have guest hosts with the guest hosts. That, of course, was not possible today due to my insane travel debacles. But here I am, and the show's going to be deep. Shanghai Community Radio. Check it out. What's up? Welcome to Place of Assembly.
Yo.
Hey.
How's everybody doing?
All good.
Yeah, we're good.
Good. So we were
Really
talking earlier, and I was saying, just so that the viewers know, I'm on 7 a.m. coffee time in Mexico City. And for you guys, I think it's 8 p.m. for everybody. We've got people here from Shanghai, Taipei, and Bali, Indonesia. So yeah, we're coming with different energetic, vibes, but we're all here, and it's going to be a vibe. So the first thing that happens on Place of Assembly is I'm going to ask you the Place of Assembly question. So just take this however you feel it. The question is, what was the craziest or most intense or ecstatic, or you see what I'm saying, event that you've ever been a part of where you had some type of role? You weren't just there as a viewer, you were responsible for something. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. You mean like an event in real? I think maybe it's an overlapping event from all of us, but definitely Machine Girls show was really nice when we had in Shanghai. Was that an anniversary party?
Not anniversary party. It's
I don't remember, but yeah, it was a party that we had, and it was in Elevator Club, which is usually kind of house music club in Shanghai, and actually Alan helped us book them, and that was a really sick show because it just didn't really match the space, and that was kind of actually a really interesting thing, I thought, and a lot of people got into it, and it was on a Sunday. So that was a really, really weird and surreal vibe. That was in 2019, I think.
Amazing. And Katie, introduce yourself.
I'm Katie. What's up? I work with Shanghai Community Radio, and I have been estranged physically from Shanghai for a year, over a year, pre whatever COVID, whatever you want to call these times, these very uncertain times, whatever. And yeah, so I work online. I live in Indonesia now, and yeah, that's it. Just here trying to maintain.
Word. And so Sam and Defan, do you guys have different answers for that, or you want to piggyback on that? Like, what's good?
Hi, I'm Defan. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely agree with what Katie was saying. Yeah, it was like a totally different vibe from what the venue was usually presents, and also like it was a Sunday. Usually they have like ambient nights on Sunday nights, yeah, so it was like Machine Girl obviously is like really, really energetic. Yeah, it was like totally different vibe. So it's really like gives like really big impression. Yeah.
Got you.
Mm.
I'm Sam, another person at SHCR. At least for me, though, I actually, unfortunately, was not at the show because of a family emergency.
Oh shit!
So
Yeah.
yeah, I missed that one. So I was kind of bummed about that. But I guess for me, though, then I think probably like a event that we kind of participated in that kind of was left left an impression, I guess, was maybe our kind of New Year's anniversary party at Tank Gallery in Shanghai. So that was from jumping into from 2019 into 2020, that event.
Oh yeah.
And that's probably one of the biggest events we've done that we participated in. So we kind of helped curate the lineup and kind of helped out with that. So it was a pretty packed crowd for that night. It was the first time we had something like of that sort of scale, at least. So yeah, that was fun. It was really hectic. So that vibe kind of was memorable.
That was a really good
Kind of
night.
running
That
the
was a
fuck
really
around.
Yeah.
So okay, so yeah, and so I'm here with Shanghai Community Radio. So something that I picked up on when you were talking about the Machine Girl thing is that there was this dynamic of juxtaposition between Machine Girl and the club and what the club normally does on that night. Katie, you said that the club was normally like house music, and then Defan, you said that on Sundays they had ambient nights. So is that dynamic of juxtaposition something that's interesting to Shanghai Community Radio in general? And, was that present at all on the New Year's Eve joint?
I know juxtaposition already. It's 5 minutes in, we drop in the J word. Yeah, a bit. I think a bit. I don't know, but I'm also when you guys are. I'm sorry, Defan. Did you want to go ahead? I was gonna go on a tangent.
Go ahead. I'm just,
so you should probably go first.
No, you go first. Yeah.
Oh, I was just saying, like, it's more. I think it's not really fair for us. I mean, yeah, definitely events are really important, but I think that there's a lot of other things that goes on. Like I think in terms of maybe, I don't know if there's another way to say juxtaposition. I don't really even understand what that word really means in its essence, but I think like an interesting maybe situation would be definitely when pandemic first started in China. That was really shocking, obviously, to the world for like numbers of reasons that we're gonna like probably unpack for the rest of our lives, whatever. But the thing is, I think it was interesting that we basically did what actually Alan and us we were talking about just a bit earlier, was kind of like these online kind of parties, live streams, raves, whatever. It was kind of just regular for what we normally do. It's just like we're a radio station. It's like broadcasting is kind of like what we always did. But this time it was that we didn't use the station at all because no one could get out of their house, like actually get out of their house. It wasn't even just on those days. It wasn't just like, oh, you should stay at home just out of moral responsibility. Like people just couldn't leave. So we actually kind of decentralized the station and like just had people log in with their own OBS and their own like stream keys and kind of take over the airways. And they were like learning how to do that without the station for the first time. And I think that that's kind of maybe a little bit more of a reflection of like maybe a really, it in itself is kind of like a collage, a pastiche or whatever of a lot of different people coming together and going on air into this one, wasn't, I guess, a platform back to back for like at one point like 36 hours in a row, like what, last year this time, like in February or January, was it February or March anyway? Yeah, so I think that's something that maybe as like a collective it's easy to do if you don't really have specific leadership maybe, or you don't have like a specific, like you have a mission but you don't have unnecessarily like a specific mode that's always defined, so that you're able to be more fluid or like reactionary to like whatever the hell is going on. You know what I mean? Does that answer the question at all?
No, I mean, it definitely answered the question, and it's also full of things that I want to like dive into and unpack. But one of the things that you mentioned that I want to dive into and unpack and get into is Alan Huang to my right. So let's get Alan's event concept in here, and then I really want to scuba dive on like why you don't know what juxtaposition means, because that's fascinating to me. I like what you were talking about there. But Alan, what's good?
It's just always out there, that word.
Hey, I'm Alan. I'm in Taipei. I do event organizing. I work with Taipei Community Radio, and I do some tour booking and event booking outside of Taipei as well. And I guess a recent exciting event is we got this new party series in Taipei, because we've all had to pivot to like local stuff, right? Because we can't book from outside anymore. So it's kind of like coming up with new ideas to like make it interesting. Taipei, of course, you can go out and go to clubs and stuff. We haven't had a real big infection rate or death rate at all out here. But so we've made a new party where it's kind of like a mahjong DJ party where people play. We make the DJs play mahjong to get their DJ fee, which is like pretty funny.
That's so cute.
I'm just trying to like make the club seem less like a club sometimes, and I think it's good. We did it last month for the first time, and it went really, really well. And we put tables out for guests to play. Of course, you can't play for money in the club because that's illegal. So most people just buy each other shots if they lose, which is good for the club.
Yeah, it's good for the club. Can I ask you, what is the club called and what is the club night? I just want to know.
Oh, it's Final. Oh,
that Final, yes.
Yeah. And then we call the night Legal Sound System. Like legal is like a hand you can get in mahjong. So.
Oh, amazing.
And it's like gibberish. It's like a gibberish hand or whatever.
That's like 8-Ball Radio that co-produces this podcast with me they used to have a space in Soho that was like in the basement of this sunglasses store, and they used to do game nights there, and it was always really sick. And they had Lele Severi, who runs 8-Ball Radio, is an Italian guy, and he had all these like really arcane Italian card games, and so everybody would be like learning these games that they were unfamiliar with. And it was man, you're reminding me that was something that at the time that I was like, man, I want to pick up on this, because when people are together learning something together, and this also reminds me, Katie, of what you said about the decentralized model of the radio station and everybody just getting a stream key and getting OBS and kind of learning how to plug in. Mm-hmm. When everybody's like in a space of like learning together, there's this kind of heightened vulnerability that really acts upon the dynamic of the space. Now, that's, I guess, not the case in the case of mahjong, because I'm presuming that everybody knows how to play mahjong, but even just games at all, like games have like a very specific energy that is a vibe. Dope. But if you guys don't mind, I want to go back to this juxtaposition thing. I'm sorry if I'm harping on it, but we don't even need to talk about that word. We don't even need to talk about that word, but there was a few things that came up, which was like, I said juxtaposition, you're like, I don't even know what that means. But then you followed up on that and said that you were talking about like a mission, but like a mission without a mode. And so I was wondering, like, if it's that quality of, if something is already diffuse and kind of undefined in the first place, then what does it mean to say juxtaposition? Because like a notion of juxtaposition requires two well-defined things. I don't know. I'm just riffing, but like, whatever people have to say,
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's kind of why that kind of threw me a loop, but yeah, I think that things evolve and they change. And I think as well, like if we're talking about like something like platforms, that's another word that's really weird, because things are hosted on other established platforms. So it's like you yourself can be a platform, but like within another platform. And who are you, like, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's always really hard to define. I don't know. But yeah, I just think that was one of those times, definitely, when it was like the most fluidity. Like the capacity of our fluidity was like really, really demonstrated. Not but as in the radio. But yeah, I think that's kind of like definitely when I was saying the mission, it is what you're saying, like this co-learning. Sam Liu and Defon did like really good curation recently for a kind of like online festival, maybe with more of this intent. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that.
I guess
like that because since last year there was like the travel restrictions, yeah. So and also like we just like think about like artists like not to say like want to introduce them to Chinese audience, like just want to discuss like how important is like their cultural background, like how does that influence their creative output. Yeah, and also because we have been doing kind of like how to say, like seeing exchange things. We have done that in the past. Like we just like want to do it in a slightly bigger scale, and yeah. So that's basically like how what this like this online festival is about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm Sam again, but I guess for on my end, for the curation at least, in terms of the term, oh, I think am I cut out?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of juxtaposition for the curation part, we wanted to kind of make it as, because at least, yeah, I guess in China, like when you talk about like international blah 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 stuff like that, it's mostly like kind of like artists from more kind of like culturally developed kind of regions or countries in the world, and that's kind of like the reason why we kind of wanted to choose and curate artists that were probably not from places that are as high up in like most Chinese kind of music scenes, like kind of radar in terms of scenes and stuff like that. So it's kind of like this juxtaposition of this word like international artists with all these artists that I guess there's this prestige in the name, like international or like foreign, I guess, and then try to kind of bring in something that they don't expect, and then like have that word broaden the scope of that word basically, and then kind of just show and like kind of create more avenues of dialogue between China and other countries around the world. That's not so limited to this kind of China and America type of vibe. I guess
that definitely gets into what my next line of inquiry was going to be, which is like, and Alan, I feel like you will also have a lot to say about this, but like when you guys say to me like, okay, Machine Girl, for me being from New York, Machine Girl, I'm like, yeah, sick idea, great band, that's intense, they're amazing, you know what I mean? But I know how that hits in New York, right? Which is like, in New York, there's like a very well-defined lane for that type of content. And it's like a lot of the people that Alan works with, like Machine Girl, S-Talk, Swan Meat, Dasakira, right? Like that's like a whole lifestyle in New York. Do you know what I mean? Which is something that I actually bemoan about New York, is that it's so big that every little thing can become something that you can like be in and never leave, but this is all just to say, inherently that's what that brings up for me, is like a Machine Girl show. But what is it like to produce that type of content and the rest of what you're doing and what Alan is doing in Shanghai? Like, how is that received there?
I think like Shanghai, in terms of like niche, it's like not so defined yet. So I think like people is like quite open to everything basically. Yeah, we don't have like so many like subcultures. I say like groups. You know, like that's like extremely defined. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Alan, what do you think about this sort of mode of questioning that I'm bringing to the table here?
Sure. I mean, like I think in Asia in general, yeah, there is definitely, at least from the artists I work with, there's definitely a specific type of appeal and a specific kind of like cross section of culture I'm trying to work with. But as far as like, I've been to Shanghai a few times. I've worked with people in Shanghai, and I talk a lot with the Taiwan crew out here, and I think a lot of things, like I think even Shanghai's appreciation of this type of kind of like, I guess underground counterculture, kind of electronic movement, at least modern countercultural movement, is like a beacon for a lot of other cities and what they're doing, at least for Taiwan for sure. A lot of what like Final and what the people out here are doing to create like kind of a sustainable, self-sustainable culture around it is leaning heavily on like what has happened in Shanghai. And I think Shenzhen can say the same thing as well, and some other cities around there. There's just like kind of like shelter and all kind of being very specific forebearers of this type of content, I suppose. But yeah, I think one of the things I'd love to hear about from SHCR is like their views on that as well, like kind of what's going on there. And I mean, like, it's not to say, that's not even saying like, oh, it's like a huge success in Shanghai. I mean, we're all going through our own struggles with how the ceilings of these scenes and like how far we can take it and what we can do with it, and what, I guess, not only the natural lifespan of it, but also like the ceilings put on it by governments and by people and by our own little communities. So
yeah, that's all stuff that would be amazing. I mean, that's something that like specifically I'm very, very interested to learn, why did Shanghai Community Radio come to exist? What was the context that was happening in? And then these notions of ceilings that Alan is talking about. Clearly, this is something that I know nothing about because I'm not there. But I mean, we in New York, in a different way, experience our own kinds of ceilings, largely connected to economic considerations. So yeah, all of this. Yeah, I mean, anything that you guys have to say about that, like, let's chop it up. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, there's so much to be said. There's an abundance, but if just to answer a direct question, when we started, it was like it was literally a community project, meaning it came out of a DIY space that eventually moved into its own space. It was like an incubation project space that has now since been like shut down and discontinued. But that's really what it was. It was a way to archive a lot of things that were going on. Like literally in this underground basement. And I think that it kind of just grew and standardized into different ways. I think a lot of the things, at least I can say for me personally, and then anybody jump in if you want to, of course, I think that there is a lot of, there's a lot of care that I need to have when I'm thinking these things, because I am an outsider. I'm born in the States. I'm not Chinese. I don't, I've lived there. I've lived in Asia now, like 11 years. So I was in China for a very long time, like, 10 years, but obviously you're always an outsider and you're always going to be observing from a different perspective. And whether that be like, oh, I'm a Westerner or not, like, it doesn't have to be this binary. It literally is like, I don't know what the hell's going on with any of the world specifically. But yeah, just living in Shanghai and seeing what's going on. This project, to me, because it was at the time very rooted in club culture, I feel like now the project is kind of getting a little bit away from club culture itself. You don't have to be a club DJ to play on the radio. You never had to be, but for some reason that just kind of happened at the same time when we started. All had just opened as well, Elevator, like, the guy, my friend Mao Mao was like my roommate at the time. Like, we were really, really tightly knit in terms of like this underground club culture, then onto the radio in a way that I'm not sure made sense, but that's just what we were doing. And I think there was so much, for me, influence from other established club meccas. And I feel like this is what maybe Sam Liu was talking about a lot, with this kind of dichotomy of the conversation being about the US or the UK or Europe versus China, and how is our music like this and comparatively, and do we have garage? Are we playing is this the advent of New York club 90s culture that's happening in China? Like, why does it always have to be this kind of like paired conversation? Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, for me, it was a lot of me confronting that, and also still being from the US and then having to think like, wait a minute, like, why do we have to worry about if we're published in RA? Why, like, can we be our own art? Like, why do we always have to make sure, if we have something in Mix Mag, or we have to, you know what I mean? It's like those things exist outside because that's where they started, and that's where they're always going to keep circulating. And for the most part, anything outside of that cinematic universe, I don't know what else, is going to be kind of looked at as this outside thing. So for me, the idea was to have something that was its own home base and would have the tea, have the gossip, have all the news, on what was actually locally going on. Have we reached that level? Has the station reached that level? Has the community reached that level? I don't know. But I think that, yeah, it is a very interesting conversation if we're going to talk about something like community, because that's going to mean something different to each community, right? So yeah, I know that was like a whirlwind of like whatever, like meta thoughts. But you guys left it empty's moment of silence, and I just filled it. So
that's my favorite kind of place.
Don't be mad at me.
A whirlwind of meta thoughts. That's like my comfort zone. So don't worry. That's where I live all the time. But yeah, but everybody jump in on that. I mean, that's like really getting into. And I mean, I'll at some point I'll share some experiences about New York, because I mean, a lot of what you were talking about being worried about being published in RA and Mixed Mag and things like this, I like very much understand that type of there's a kind of oppressive necessity to be defined in terms of these entities that people have kind of stopped questioning, and I loved hearing you talk about that. But I don't want to interrupt this flow, so whatever folks have to say, like.
Yeah. And also I think like in terms of like alternative music or like club music, like in China, like especially for like mainstream media, it's in China, it's always like a byproduct of some other things like fashion or So what when it's like featured in mainstream like media, it's always like this, look at like those DJs, they're like pretty cool, like fashionable thing. It's like a fashionable thing. So, and also I think like in terms of like for the mass, like it's like club culture and like underground music is still like kind of like a confusion, because like there is like not much like online presence, especially when we started the project. it's like you don't have like anywhere you can search like a DJ's performance like online. Obviously, if you go to club every weekend, you can hear all the different DJs. But in terms of if I'm just like sitting at home, I want to watch a DJ performance online. It's like there wasn't many. Yeah. So one of like our thoughts on starting this project is like building like an for Shanghai's underground scene as like underground music. It's like an archive documenting these as well. Yeah. So basically like that.
Got you.
I guess jumping in as well, especially in terms of what Defon's talking about, like lack of the documentation. I guess another thing that's also kind of lacking is some sort of like kind of more critical music press within China. So a lot of the times to actually gain that recognition, you need to be covered by kind of foreign press, because that's the only press that's like around to do that sort of stuff right now, especially like, you know, RA or, you know, Pitchfork, whatever, what have you. So that's still where most people still turn to, even though you need a VPN for most of these things. So like club kids will still go on RA and stuff like that to look for artists. But there's less of that type of stuff like within China. Like there's still crews kind of doing some pieces on new releases within China. Like say like GNG, shouts out to them. But yeah, it's less I guess music, at least I'm also coming from an outsider's perspective as well, because I didn't grow up in China. But at least for me, it seems that music itself, like as the entire entity itself, it's more of a functional thing than a cultural thing within China, because it, like, at least like not everybody like really like listens to music or like kind of follows a lot of the kind of cultural context around it. It's not as kind of a big deal as it is in the States or in Canada, at least. Just from my personal experience. I don't know how everyone else feels about that. So that's kind of, and just having SHCR, I think what kind of envisioning it to kind of fill is that kind of role where we kind of give kind of more of a context to a lot of the music that's kind of being played, that you know, DJs are putting out, musicians are putting out. So yeah.
Word. So Sam, I have a question for you, and then Alan, I want to get back to your ideas about ceilings, because I love finding out about ceilings. When you say it's more of a functional thing, can you describe that functionality?
How do I describe this? It's more like I don't know if it's a function of, you know, like platforms like, you know, Spotify kind of changing up how we consume music, or like how you consume music itself in China, I guess. Just like, especially with the advent of streaming, it's become like more of a kind of like a background kind of filler music. I guess that kind of goes around the world as well. But also just kind of like dancing music, like you gotta play, like Gabber is like really big here right now. It's been pretty big for a while, and it just kind of like just fast kind of music just to kind of like just dance to, just like bong di. So like that's it's less people caring about kind of what people are talking about in the music or anything. It's just kind of like, okay, this can make me move.
Understood.
Yeah.
So Alan, I want, can you talk more about this experience of ceilings that you were kind of bringing up, and then maybe we open that up to the group and see what everybody's experience of that is, and I can share about New York and whatnot.
Sure, I suppose. So yeah, I was talking earlier about like kind of the reality of like us being an more underground scene here in Taipei, and just like the ceilings, of which the perceived ceilings, I think a lot of people in the scene deal with when they, you know, kind of have bigger long-term projects going on, of like, you know, how do you get like, you know, the division between underground and mainstream is just really wide in Taipei. Taipei's just, you know, a way smaller town than New York or Shanghai even. And, you know, we just like have a reality of like, there's kind of like a muted or maybe even like a pessimism about just like how well an event could go. So whenever we're organizing a party or something, and like we can't have like kind of these like, I guess, ideologically pure parties that a lot of people who go abroad to like Berlin or New York or something come back with, like the idea of just like having a cool party with cool DJs in a room and just having that do like 500 people, because that's just not how, like, I guess currently Taiwanese people, at least young people, like interface with like going out and going to events. Definitely the fans of that kind of stuff are also like trained to do that in other places other than Taipei. And so it's like kind of a struggle sometimes to like envision how to continue to throw events that are like interesting, but also have the potential for growth. And then we talk about, you know, like structural ceilings, I suppose. Like there's just like a lack of space here in Taipei. Like we're probably living with the most like actual like club spaces accessible to underground scene than we've ever had. Before it was just corner, and now we have like 3 venues or so, even though one just shut down. And that's kind of like, you know, we can't handle 3 venues. Like we can't sustain 3 venues. That's like super tough to think about, I think, for a lot of young people in Taipei. But there's optimism. There's like very young people coming up with some things. And I don't think these are like strict ceilings sometimes, as much as something you kind of need to adapt to, and you just can't apply in bulk lessons that you learn from other cities. You kind of have to develop your own signature. And I think from that, Taipei will actually develop like a specific signature to what it's been doing, or at least I hope so. And I'm trying to work on that with people in the scene as well. And then, yeah, but I'd love to hear about just like kind of things that y'all in Shanghai and what in New York you run into. I mean, I have my conjectures, of course, but always love to hear like what people have to say about that kind of stuff.
Yes, in terms of clubs in Shanghai, I think it's the same. Like we've had a lot of new clubs open up as well. Aside from, you know, like in the beginning it was mostly like Shelter doing kind of underground, more techno kind of stuff. But now we have a lot more clubs open up that kind of bridge between underground and then kind of more mainstream techno, like kind of like Berlin type of vibe, like mainstream Berlin type of techno vibes in Shanghai. So there's a lot of those clubs opening up now, and that's also kind of taking away a lot of the audiences from the kind of more like clubs like All and Elevator these days. So yeah, I guess it's not so much of a ceiling, I guess, but it's also just like a differ in taste. Like I don't know how to exactly describe it, but the audience is definitely bigger than before, for sure. But taste-wise, it's being kind of influenced in a different direction, I guess. And people are kind of moving towards different kind of directions, like the audience. So yeah, it's hard to get like a packed house, like you were saying.
Is it fair to say that like among everyone here, and I mean I would include myself in this in a certain way, that like audience development and cultivation is a specific initiative of the radio station and something that people experience in some way, like that's an important part of the mission, or what is the take on that?
I think that's definitely what I was wanting to know as well, because I think, yeah, for sure, in the beginning, I think it's something like you're like, oh, I have this lifestyle and I really love it and I want to share it and I want to enjoy it with other people who have the same perspective as me and understand like this cultural reference and know this track and know why I'm wearing these pants and why I'm drinking this drink. You know what I mean? And it's this kind of obviously like niche carving that we're into, and I think Sam Lewis may be referencing what it sounds like building outwards instead of upwards. But I think, yeah, as well with this, it's like, does that really have to be the goal? You know, I mean, obviously people want their parties packed because they need it to be to sustain, or maybe it's just more fun that way, or maybe it's an idealized, romanticized version of things that, you know, we grew up seeing and, you know, depicted in either like rave documentaries or like, you know, the other music we listened to as, you know, coming up as kids or whatever. But it does make me question sometimes. I mean, I'm out of the game, you know what I mean? Like I'm still in quarantine after a year where, you know, like Taipei and Shanghai, you know, and even now New York is like, I think people are going out, people are going, I'm just thinking like, why do I want to, you know, see people out anyway? Like, is that really, does that always have to be the goal of like, do we need to have big parties? I think it's interesting. Like, I think definitely what Alan was saying is a lot of what I feel like Gavin would say in Hong Kong, and like seeing how Hong Kong has developed as well. And obviously like Hong Kong Community Radio is for me a really big inspiration. So I think that they have the vision of like, okay, well, if we can't create an IRL experience that feels like you know, like one of these clubs that, you know, we've wanted to be, or that we've seen, you know, maybe in New York or wherever else, we have publishing power, right? They not only have a radio station and a click that's like publishing from there, but then they also have like a record label, you know. So I think that I think the goals can be different. I think that the modes can be different and still have the same mission. Whereas like definitely, I'm sure you know as well, Sam Holo, like what real estate, even the entire game of real estate plays in building a actual scene. So having these clubs now in Shanghai, I have no idea, which I shouldn't even be talking of what it looks like because I haven't been there in so long. But to the fact that people are now snapping up real estate so much is like really interesting to me because yeah, what does that mean? But yeah, I think to answer your question is like, yeah, does that really have to be the goal? Do you have to have a packed club? Do you have to have so many people into it? Like, can people be into it in other ways? Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to explore.
Word. Yeah, I'm really glad that you're talking about that. I have like I have strong feelings about this territory of cultural, you know, consideration. I've been in New York for 25 years, you know, so I've been traveling around the world for, you know, to do music and whatnot for over a decade now. And so I've seen a lot of these scenes in the major markets. New York, of course, like I've had a hyper front row seat on this in New York, where in the 90s, when I first got to New York, intimacy, there was a real valuation of intimacy. And like, if you had an event for 10 or 15 or 20 people, that was fine. It was like, maybe that just was a vibe that night and you had to be there. It's like, love to hate it, hate to miss it, you know, like, and then there had a lot of these scenes around the world in the major markets kind of organically grew to this place where they were sustaining these bigger audiences. But then at a certain point, in my opinion, this is like my hot take, I'm in the minority here, there starts to be this kind of like cocaine logic where like you get to your first 500 person event and then you have to have 500 people at every event. So you have to start flying in more people and booking people that you maybe wouldn't have booked before. And if you look at this is a really good way to look at it. If you look at the construction lit, right? When people talk about the event was lit, it was lit. And now lit is just used to, you just talk about a cappuccino and say, oh, it's lit, you know, it means good, but what it also implies is big. It implies scale. So it conflates scale with quality. Do you know what I mean? And that's something that like in the 90s, nobody would have ever said anything like that. Like it just wouldn't have occurred to someone to not critically engage with the idea of like, wait a minute, you're saying that in order for something to be good, it has to be big. You know what I mean? And I think really like in terms of ceilings in New York, that is something that I experience as a ceiling, which is that like New York is starting to take on this kind of Ibiza type quality where like we're just known for these like massive raves, you know what I mean? And everybody's, you know, every young promoter that's coming up is trying to do a party for 100 people and then 200 people and then 500 people and then 15 or 2,000 people and then just maintain that. And it's like, that is so limiting for so many people, you know, in terms of all of the other kinds of things that could be happening that maybe just inherently lack that potential. You know what I mean? And coming from New York, we're known for shit that lacks that potential. Do you know what I mean? Like the work of late John Coltrane is not important because it was drawing 2,000 people out. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like that. So Katy, what you're talking about when you're like, does everything have to find expression in terms of audience interest and size of audience? And do we have to think about and define our goals in those terms? That's something that I think is extraordinarily important to think about. And I think that the work of organizations like yours and a lot of what's happening in minor markets holds tremendous potential for the exploration of things that don't have that potential. Not that you guys aren't doing events that bring out 500 people, like I'm sure you are. You know what I'm saying? But just like you were getting into this territory of thought that to me is super important, because that like everything's got to be the Berghain shit is just is like oppressive. I experience that as oppressive. As a person who runs a venue, I just hate that I constantly have to be hearing about and thinking about that something's going to be lit. Anyways, that was a little bit of a rant, but you know.
Yeah, no, I feel that.
But yeah, I guess a big part of that is like the financial considerations of running space with prime real estate, as Katy was talking about. And I think that's also, again, I guess, yeah, Katy's also talked about that, but in terms of like HKCR, how, you know, not having that venue, they're able to basically kind of function as a venue without having the same overhead as like a IRL club. And that allows for a lot more different expressions, which I guess I'm feeling like that's kind of the direction kind of SHCR is kind of taking, especially because before we would more often have like kind of like more one-off type of streams, especially in the very beginning. Our space itself wasn't super like permanent or secure, but yeah, but now we're like, you know, hosting, you know, shows, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 shows like a week. It's becoming more of like an online venue vibe than anything else, without having the same overheads or financial, like full financial considerations that a club like you know, all, or you know, any other clubs that exist in the city would have to care about.
Noted. Well, this is
I
a
think
good time.
that was definitely.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, I keep talking. I haven't talked to people in a long time, so you guys caught me at a really bad. Anyway, no. I was just thinking, like, I think it. I don't know if Alan, if this pertains to you, especially as like, I don't know, you know, your role as like a promoter or whatever, but I think the concern, like Sam Lou was saying, is that definitely you have to think of like overturning of tickets, like how many tickets can you produce in order to sustain. And I think basically my point was how you guys wrapped that up so well, is what I was trying to say is that, yeah, definitely if you can think of a way that sustainability is not contingent on scalability, then you have hacked this cycle of, oh, are we underground? Are we not? Do we have to have a lit party? Do we have to have a big rave? Do we have to, like, if you can gamify this system in a different way, then I think that cycle doesn't have to be exploited in a way that it was a lot like, you know, in the 90s, 2000s, especially like in the, you know, like Bloghouse era and all these like lit eras, like where we had to like we had to have the biggest party if you wanted to make the most money. And now, like what Sam Lou is saying, if you can get your overhead paid for, you know, then, and it's smaller and it's only online, I think the new problem becomes, can still be like actually lit, like can it actually still be impactful even if it's on an online space? And that to me is the new issue, is that now everyone has realized that they can have an online space. They can publish things easily. Of course, I mean, literally we are just living content. So, but how do you make that as impactful as these big raves were, you know, back in the day? So yeah, that's kind of like where I feel like we are. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. I don't know as well, like Alan, if you have any issue, like any experience with that as well, like in Taipei. I'm really curious about that.
Totally agree with like the the shift to online and like the new problems and the new benefits it presents in that online space is the new question is how can you have an impact when everybody's kind of doing it. And it's funny because like you and I, or you guys and I, would be doing these things before COVID hit, and so we have experience. We already like have this kind of like facility set up, but you know it was so quick for everybody else who didn't have this experience. A lot of venues and a lot of just like organizers and a lot of corporate entities to like kind of just spring up with their ideas of what like an online party should be, an online experience could be. And I think this is like a common theme in 2020, 2021, and like both the benefits and the dangers of new, even decentralized technology are kind of presenting to a lot of cultural and art initiatives. I think the whole NFT stuff ties into this too.
Shit, we didn't even start there.
Right,
okay,
but I mean, it's all intertwined, right? Like the whole thing's intertwined, and that's like my concern with a lot of online space and a lot of because it's so like the overhead is lower. It doesn't mean that necessarily like everybody can like benefit more. It just means sometimes that the people who need, you know, an income, like artists and people who organize these things, sometimes just get a lot less because it's perceived already. It's very transparent. It's perceived as being open. And not only that, but a lot of the platforms that allow such accessibility, like Twitch or like YouTube or whatever, you know, now they're kind of the venues we have to talk to, and they're kind of the ones pushing content one way or the other, however they see fit. And so it even feels like less control sometimes. And I think HKCR is wonderful in the way that they've spun up their own server. And I think that's one of the keys to it, is that you kind of have to build this thing where you're not reliant on these corporate entities. And I mean, I talked about this, I think, a little bit last time I talked on the podcast, and that, you know, there are many online entities that are looking to spin up their own servers, but you have to look at the players involved. You have to look at like kind of like what's going on, even with these like small development communities. Like there's just a lot of sus behavior going on still, even on an interpersonal level. And it's just like, do you educate and get autonomous, or do you work together in co-ops, or what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And then at the end of the day, it's also, okay, I can build this niche for like these people I work with and this like culture I appreciate. But you know, we do still live in a real space. And even after post-COVID, we'll still have to like look at adopting this kind of thing. And this kind of got to be, you know, I have the benefit of living in Taiwan, where I have access to the space still of these people living around me, and us being able to commiserate and talk about what we do now and what we do post-COVID, if a post-COVID world exists, that we can continue to do the things. And some people are just waiting it out, and some people are trying to do things now, build things now, and there's like this whole question of that.
Word.
So I think like ideally I'd like to find a nice balance, being able to work in the online sector to benefit. At the end of the day, for me, like the most paramount thing is like being able to provide sustainability, not for some culture, some scene, but for the people in the scene, you know, for the artists and the people involved in doing the work, you know, have fairness, egalitarianness to, and, you know, support people who want to do this for a living fairly and sustainably. Whatever tricks or gamification or weird things I can do on a logistics or a business standpoint to do that is fair game for me.
Word.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
sorry, Katie, did you want to jump in?
I was just gonna say, yeah. Well, I mean, just I don't know. Should we tell him? Should we tell him? No, but just when you mentioned HKCR's server, it's actually interesting story, and actually we haven't really talked about this publicly because I don't know. Should we? But we have the same web dev team as them, but the issues with setting up a streaming service in China are insurmountably different than anywhere else in the world. And this is what we really tragically like had to learn firsthand over the course of like 6 months while we were trying to build our own server. Because definitely I agree with you, Alan, when you're saying, you know, like we have to, we think we're like, you know, we're all just self-publishing and da-da-da, but actually no, you're abiding by YouTube community guidelines, and you're abiding by Twitch, you're abiding by all these other, you know, fine print that you, and what happens for, you know, us in Shanghai, that was one of the biggest issues we had ever had, was when we started, we couldn't stream on YouTube. It's impossible. And also when you do, you copyright strike. Then also when we want to stream on the local streaming service, Billy, a lot of things that don't pass as well. Like even, you know, when DFON uploads things with weird titles, sometimes we'll also get not being able to publish this stuff. So we're thinking, okay, like the best solution to this is to have our own server, which I don't know how much time we have today to explain how the intricacies of that is so mind-boggling. But I just wanted to say that in case anyone who is listening to this has any ideas and would love to reach out to us, please let us know, because honestly, like, I have no idea. And I also don't want to use the platform to advertise for that. And just in case something, you know what I mean, comes back to us and we're like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't really know how to get around that.
Yeah. I think that would be, sorry, I think that would be a fascinating thing to unpack a little bit more, to try to understand, because you're saying the difficulties in China in terms of mounting your own server are, you know, insurmountable, and like more so than anywhere else. That's something that I'd be really interested in learning about. Also, just quickly resonating with what Alan was saying, like when doing this podcast is something that I wanted to do for a long time. And then I was just so mired in the details of running a nightclub that I just couldn't think about doing a podcast, unfortunately. But when COVID hit, I had nothing to do. I was like, okay, I'm going to actually get this thing off the ground. And I actually had some meetings, and the musical director, the person who had just been hired as the musical director of Twitch, right at the beginning of pandemic, when Twitch was kind of blowing up and becoming like the go-to for a lot of where content was going. That person is somebody that I knew just from the music game in New York. And I took a meeting with them, and I was kind of explaining, you know, what the podcast was going to be, and, you know, talking to people who are operating spaces and everything during this time when people don't have access to space and da-da-da. And I was trying, and I just vibe with what Alan is saying, because you kind of have to go to these folks. And I found that my leverage in that conversation, because of this issue of scalability that you brought up, and it was just like a hard no. Do you know what I mean? I mean, she was cool. She was like, here's like a premium account, you know, you're grandfathered in, like, it's just, I sent me all of this stuff I had to like sign up with and everything. But like the idea that I would get some sort of placement or some bump from Twitch or something was just like, I mean, forget about it. You know what I'm saying? Because like, how many streams am I going to pull down? They're looking at like, if you're not pulling down, you know, $50,000 streams, like, why would they even fuck with you? Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, there is like a much lower, like something like this, like what we're doing, just chopping it up and going deep, you know, just doesn't even exist to those folks. But Katy, the thing about the insurmountability of having your own server, I'm like super, all of you, you know, Sam Liu and Difan, I'm super interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, so basically,
Sam and Difan probably have better answer than me. Anyway, yeah, I want to give it over to you guys.
Yeah, so basically it's like just like having a streaming platform in China. It's like if it's like in the legitimate way, it's like almost like impossible to achieve unless you are huge corporations, like basically. Yeah, it's like you will have to need to have like 10 million RMB or something to be able to. It's basically like how TV station operates. Like they consider it's like a TV station if you want to have like a streaming platform. So so if you like, a lot of people are doing like some companies doing, they change a server to like a broad server to stream. But the problem with that is it like in the Great Firewall is like always changing. Like you don't know what will be blocked the next day. Yeah, so it's like really unstable to have a server abroad. But then if you want to like stream using Chinese server, it's like almost impossible. So basically that's how, yeah, that's like how difficult it is. Yeah.
So how do you presently do it?
We just like using like something like Twitch, like not like a Chinese equivalent of Twitch. It's called Bilibili. So it used to be something like they have like just it used to like people watching anime there. Yeah. So
Right.
but yeah. But it has like some people like it has all kinds of videos, like basically kind of like a Chinese YouTube kind of thing. Yeah.
Word. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. This has been amazing because we've done a lot of like context, you know, like talking about Shanghai and broader Asia, and then like getting into this like streaming thing, and you know, like things needing to be lit and different models. But I'm also curious to hear, and maybe it's more pertinent to refer back to like normative times and think about if and when that comes back. But just the experience of actually running the station, your physical location, your residence, and like what that is as an experience, and how that participates in and informs the space of the community or the scene where you are, like in a less conceptual, more like what is that actually like what is that experience like, and what does it mean to people? Like, let me ask a more focused question. Do you have a lot of people coming through the space?
Yeah, we have like a lot of people coming through the space. Yeah.
Like that's where people make their shows.
Yeah.
And
yeah, like yeah, just like yeah, I think like almost all of our shows are like recorded in our studio. Like people coming through our studio and record. Not like it's streaming from our studio. Yeah, what I mean.
And is that like, I know like in New York, the community or online radio stations, you know, dominantly there's like Lot, 8 Ball, Montez, Half Moon. There's a few others. It does perform a kind of galvanizing effect, like people link up there. You know, one person has their show and then the next person has their show, and they like cross paths, and people come and hang out and just post up in the studio and like watch somebody's show going down. And then like having a weekly or monthly show on one of those stations kind of articulates something about you in the broader context of the scene, and like and all those stations kind of they sort of consolidate like parts of the scene and function as like amplification for that. And I mean, is what you're doing kind of similar, or is it different? Like, you know, just the what's the role like that y'all play? Like, you know what I mean?
I guess for us, maybe it's slightly different because we don't have shows that are back to back that often. When the schedule is like a bit more packed, yeah, we do, but it's mostly we just kind of, because especially like we don't have like a ton of people running the studio, right? Like especially with Katy in Indonesia right now, it's mostly just Defon and I in the studio most of the time. So we don't have a ton of like yeah, like in terms of resources to be running it like 24/7 or even like 12 hours a day. So we're not able to have that sort of same packed back-to-back type of schedule that facilitates this sort of meeting between different artists. But we still do. It still happens. I'm trying to think of situations where that's kind of happened. I guess it's mostly kind of like people just kind of like watching each other online. Honestly, that's more of it.
Mhm.
That's more. It's more like a venue, I guess, in that way. You just kind of like people see like, oh, tonight this person's streaming. It's like, all right, I might watch it, I might not, whatever, and then they can link up that way mostly. They're just kind of serving as that kind of more of an online point. It's less physical, I would say.
Got you. And so I guess my next and possibly last question is what's the future look like for SHCR? Like, what are you guys planning? Like, what are you getting into, and how do you see it growing and changing? And yeah, what's the vision?
I guess I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in, but yeah, at least right now, like we just wrapped up our like kind of online festival, like Out of Touch. That was in March, mid-March. We just finished it up. Everything's archived on that already on YouTube as well as on Bilibili. So we're kind of taking a short little breather basically, because that kind of took a while, especially with the website as well. And I think we're also going to be we have to focus on, first of all, like the website stuff. We're kind of in a rut right now with that because of the aforementioned server problems. So yeah, that's kind of the direction that we're trying to develop in a bit more, is to kind of really actually finish up the website. I don't know how long it's going to take, but that's a long-term goal of ours, no matter what. And then I guess since aside from that, still basically just kind of like keeping the space just up and running, and kind of just consolidating residents, making sure everyone gets their stuff out. Yeah.
Word.
Yeah.
Something else occurred to me to ask, Alan.
Yep.
In your experience routing artists through broader Asian tours, what is the role like from your vantage point that spaces like SHCR and HKCR play in the scene that you're kind of participating in and plugging into when you're bringing artists through these places?
Well, it's just I think for me, when I route tours in Asia, it's much less about, because the artists I work with are pretty kind of pretty underground, low to the ground and stuff, like kind of up and coming guys. I trust a lot of the people who run like these kind of community radio stations with having kind of like the open-mindedness, or at least the knowledge of being able to work with these artists and put them in the right spot. It's been the case with Gavin, of course, in HKCR, and so far it's been the case with HCR. Like, they talked about the Machine Girl show, it being so great, and Machine Girl had a great time too, and we're just like super happy to do that kind of thing. And I don't know if I pitch it to someone who just doesn't have quite like at least maybe like a more DIY kind of sensibility. They don't have the ability to kind of go with the flow on something that may have a lot of juxtaposition normally. And so it's been really cool with working with like kind of people in the scenes who are used to kind of making a round peg fit into a square hole sometimes. Yeah, I try to find people like that in like every scene, and there are typically, and it's great to always like that there is such a that kind of like go with the flowness is kind of like a universal mindset. That's very comforting to know, and is very optimistic. Instills a lot of optimism in myself.
Cool. Yeah. Well, This has been amazing. I mean, this has been fascinating for me to hear about this and learn from you guys and learn about SHCR. Anybody coming with some last thoughts, final hot takes, tea to spill, whatever?
Yeah, like if you know how to route a network, hit us up, please. We are definitely, we will pay you whatever we can. Like Sam said, that's our opus. I feel like definitely getting this situation. But yeah, other than that, thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. But wait, before we get off, I want to ask you a little bit more specifics about that because I want to reach out to some people and stuff. So the language I should use,
yeah, okay.
if you know how to route a network.
Well, it's basically what we need is a network engineer. So I don't know. I mean, do you guys think we're getting in trouble if I say this stuff? Basically, there's so many, there's a firewall, okay? And what's happened is basically what Defon was explaining is that you have to have these certain licenses if you want to host your own, if you want to have your own basically server.
Streaming platform, yeah.
Exactly. And basically what we're doing is we are a pirate radio of the internet radio. We essentially have to pirate this in ways that we might not even be able to talk about. I'm not really sure. And exactly what Defon was saying before, these laws and legislations locally for like local Chinese IPs, they change constantly depending on what global cultural event is happening, how the market's doing, whatever, they're going to change constantly. So if there's anybody who understands Chinese IP law and also has a bit of web dev or network engineering background, like I would love to be able to, to pick their brain if they're interested, or if there's somebody who wants to do something like this for fun. I know there are actually people who do find pleasure in creating these kind of solutions. So yeah, that's definitely what we're looking for.
And this is something that Gavin at HKCR actually did successfully.
So, and Hong Kong operates under a different IP law.
Yeah, it's like a different system than mainland China. So.
And the same with Taiwan. So mainland China has different IP laws that are much different than yeah.
Okay. The rest of the world, basically.
Yeah, the rest of the world, and also Hong Kong and
Got it. Yeah. Well, yeah, I actually know somebody that I'm gonna ask. I was a resident artist with this web platform called 2B.be. And there's this they had this kind of genius guy that they pulled from Google who kind of built out all this crazy stuff for them. And I'm gonna hit him up about it. So I wanted to get some more specific language from you. Okay, sick. Well, this has been amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for coming on Place of Assembly, and continued good luck, and we will be in touch.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Later, guys. Bye.
Pleasure talking.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, back at home. Shanghai Community Radio. Alan Huang, Awesome Agency Asia. Loved hearing about the potential for virtual spaces to have impact, the possibility of impact measured not at scale, but in terms of depth, meaning, what have you. And if anybody can help these folks spin up a server, get at us, slide into the DMs. This is Place of Assembly podcast, produced by Hollow NYC in partnership with Experimental Sound Studio Chicago and 8 Ball Radio. The first of a 3-episode series, Arts, Culture, and Organizing in China and Hong Kong. Turn up next week. We're here for it. Thanks and peace.
A tendency to building castles in the air.